The city was alive with its usual rhythm, a mix of honking cars, murmured conversations from sidewalk cafes, and the occasional bark of a street vendor calling out his prices. It was a warm afternoon, the kind of day where the sun lingered just enough to paint long shadows across the pavement. On one of those busy streets, Marcus Johnson walked with measured steps, his polished shoes clicking with an almost deliberate calm. He was a man who commanded respect without speaking a word. His tall frame was wrapped in a dark, well-pressed suit, and his confident stride suggested he belonged wherever he chose to stand. There was something about the way he carried himself, upright, steady, unhurried, that turned heads. Yet Marcus wasn't a man seeking attention. He was there on business. A business that would change everything. Leaning against a police cruiser a few yards from the precinct entrance was Officer Daniels. Stocky, with a square jaw and a permanent smirk, he was the sort of officer who carried his authority like a weapon. Sunglasses covered his eyes, though anyone could sense the disdain behind them. His uniform shirt was stretched slightly over his stomach, his utility belt hanging lower than regulation. A wad of gum bulged in his cheek as he chewed noisily, arms crossed over his chest like he owned the entire block. When Daniels saw Marcus approaching, his lip curled into an almost instinctive sneer. To him, Marcus was just another black man in an expensive suit, out of place, out of line. Daniels had spent years reinforcing his own belief that he was the gatekeeper of the precinct, that it was his job to remind people where they did and didn't belong. "Hey," Daniels called out sharply, pushing himself off the cruiser. His voice carried the edge of command, though it lacked the respect true authority demands. "What are you doing around here?" Marcus didn't break his stride. His eyes remained fixed ahead, calm, as though Daniels's presence was no more than a passing gust of wind. He had encountered men like Daniels before, men who mistook arrogance for strength, men who believed a badge gave them the right to belittle others. Daniels wasn't accustomed to being ignored. He stepped directly into Marcus's path, spreading his arms slightly, a physical wall of authority. "I asked you a question," he snapped. "You deaf or something? You don't belong here." Only then did Marcus stop. He raised his head, meeting Daniels's hidden eyes. His voice was steady, low, but powerful in its restraint. "I have business here. Step aside." The officer gave a short laugh, the kind that oozed condescension. "Business? What business could you possibly have in this building?" He tilted his head, chewing his gum harder. "You trying to sell something? Or maybe you got yourself into trouble, huh?" Marcus's silence was more cutting than any insult. He stood still, shoulders squared, expression unreadable. Daniels mistook the silence for weakness. "You think you're special 'cause you're wearing that suit," Daniels said, circling him slightly, like a predator testing its prey. "Newsflash. People like you don't get a free pass just 'cause you play dress up." And then it happened. Daniels leaned forward, spat forcefully, and a thick glob landed squarely on Marcus's polished shoes. The sound of it, a wet splatter against the leather, seemed louder than the city noise around them. For a moment, time froze. Marcus looked down at the spit, the shine of his shoes now marred by the officer's contempt. His jaw tightened ever so slightly, but his eyes remained calm, cold, unreadable. Inside, a storm raged, anger, insult, the sting of yet another man mistaking his skin for his worth. But Marcus had lived long enough, fought enough battles, to know that giving into anger only gave power to the one provoking it. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his gaze back to Daniels. There was no rage in his eyes, no raised voice, no physical retaliation. Only a quiet, commanding presence that seemed to strip Daniels of his false bravado. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks with measured precision, as though brushing off not just the spit, but the disrespect itself. Then he spoke, his words like ice, controlled, yet carrying an unshakable weight. "You'll regret that." Daniels blinked, momentarily thrown off by the calmness. Then he sneered again, though the cracks in his confidence were beginning to show. "Oh yeah, what are you gonna do? File a complaint?" He leaned in close, his breath hot and bitter. "Good luck with that." Marcus said nothing more. Without rushing, without flinching, he stepped around Daniels and continued toward the precinct entrance. Each stride carried the quiet dignity of a man who didn't need to fight to prove his worth. His back was straight, his steps unwavering. Behind him, Daniels stood rooted to the sidewalk, the smirk struggling to stay on his face. Somewhere deep down, something about Marcus unsettled him, though he couldn't yet name it. To Daniels, Marcus was just another man he could step on. He had no idea that the man he had just spat on was about to step into the precinct as his new boss, the chief of police who would soon decide his future. The precinct had an energy of its own that day, thick with anticipation, restless in its rhythm. Phones rang, printers hummed, and radios buzzed with chatter from patrol cars across the city. Yet, beneath the daily noise, something else pulsed through the halls: expectation. Word had spread fast that the new chief of police was arriving. No one knew exactly what kind of man he was, only that he had been sent from the state's capital with a reputation for cleaning house wherever he went. Some officers were curious, others were nervous, and a few, the ones who had grown comfortable in their bad habits, whispered their complaints bitterly. At the corner of the main floor, Officer Daniels swaggered in. He carried himself with the smug satisfaction of a man who believed he had already set the tone for his day. Still chewing gum, still smirking, he tossed his cap on a desk and slapped one of his colleagues on the back. "You wouldn't believe this guy the first stopped outside," Daniels began, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Suit, shiny shoes, walking like he owns the place. Thought he had business in our building." He chuckled, as though telling a joke at a bar. "Guess I reminded him who runs this street." Some officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others avoided eye contact altogether. Not everyone approved of Daniels's brand of arrogance, but most had seen it too many times to bother confronting him. That was the way it had always been. Daniels running his mouth, flexing his badge, puffing his chest. But today felt different. A younger officer, fresh out of the academy, spoke up hesitantly. "Hey, Daniels, maybe you should, tone it down. Chief's about to be here any minute." Daniels rolled his eyes dramatically. "Please. Another bureaucrat in a suit. They show up, make speeches about community and accountability, then go back to their cushy office. I've been here long enough to know who really keeps this place running." His words drew a few nervous laughs, though most of the room remained silent. It wasn't the sort of silence that meant agreement, it was the kind that warned something was coming. The tension thickened as the precinct's captain stepped out of his office, straightening his tie. He looked more anxious than usual, his eyes darting toward the entrance every few seconds. "Everyone, on your best behavior," he barked, his voice taut. "The chief will be here any second. Line up if you're near the lobby. Let's show him some respect." Respect. The word seemed to hang in the air. Daniel snorted under his breath. Respect is earned, not handed out just 'cause someone's got a fancy title. Then it happened. The front doors swung open, and the buzz of the room collapsed into silence. Footsteps echoed across the tiled floor, calm but commanding, each one resonating like the beat of a drum. Heads turned. Whispers died. Marcus Johnson walked in. He didn't need to announce himself. He didn't need to scan the room for approval. His very presence demanded it. The same man Daniels had spat on minutes earlier now strode through the lobby with the quiet power of someone who knew exactly where he belonged. His tailored suit seemed sharper under the fluorescent lights, his polished shoes carrying the trace of that earlier insult, but no shame. For a moment, no one breathed. Daniels's smirk dissolved as though it had never existed. His gum stuck to his teeth as his jaw froze open. His brain scrambled to make sense of what he was seeing. Marcus stopped at the center of the room, turned to face the assembled officers, and let his eyes sweep over them with measured precision. Every man and woman in uniform stood a little straighter under that gaze, as if invisible hands had pulled their shoulders back. Finally, his voice broke the silence. It was steady, deep, and unyielding. "Good afternoon," he began, his words carrying across the room like a command. "My name is Marcus Johnson. As of today, I am your new chief of police." The declaration landed like a thunderclap. A ripple of shock moved through the crowd, some gasps, some nervous shuffles, some glances exchanged between officers who suddenly understood the weight of their past behavior. Daniels felt the blood drain from his face. His chest tightened, his mind replaying the moment outside, the spit, the sneer, the smug words. He wanted to disappear, to melt into the floor, to take back what he had done. But the truth stood in front of him, looking directly into his soul. The man he had tried to humiliate now held the power to define his future. Marcus let the silence stretch, his gaze pausing on Daniels just long enough for everyone to notice. Then he continued, his voice calm but edged with steel. "I came here to build something better. To restore honor to this department. To make sure this badge means more than authority, it means service. Respect. Integrity." He let the words settle, heavy and deliberate. "And let me be clear. Anyone who cannot live up to those values will find no place under my command. The officers stood frozen, some nodding, some staring at the ground. Daniels's legs felt weak, but he locked his knees, unwilling to let them see him falter. Marcus gave a short nod, dismissing the crowd. Back to work. We'll talk more soon. As the officers scattered, whispers began anew, different now, filled with awe, with fear, with the sharp edge of realization. Change had arrived, and it stood in the form of the very man Daniels had spat on. And for Daniels, the walls of the precinct felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. His arrogance had no place here anymore.